Similarly, if you think from the producer's point of view, producers are also maintaining some amount of surplus. Look, for the first unit, producer is ready to supply the first unit if the producer gets minimum this much. But producer is actually getting this much for the first unit, again P star. So that means producer is maintaining some amount of surplus, which is given by OP star minus this. For the second unit, this is the amount that the producer wants to receive, but producer is receiving much more than minimum willingness to receive. For the third unit, this one. For the fourth unit, this one, but actual payment is this. So likewise, producers are also maintaining a surplus given by this area. So this area is known as producer surplus. Okay, so producer surplus equals to the triangle AOB. And how do you measure this? Total payment received minus minimum willingness to pay. Total payment received is this triangle A, O, Q star and B. This is the total payment. So total payment received minus minimum willingness to receive. That means area above the supply curve, below the price line. Area above the supply curve but below the price. That is how we define producer surplus. Okay, we have learned consumer surplus, we have now learned producer surplus as well. Okay, so both of them are maintaining surplus. Consumers are maintaining surplus because they are paying less than what they want to pay. Producers are also maintaining surplus because they are receiving more than what they want to receive. Supply curve gives minimum willingness to receive to supply a particular unit. But actual payment that the suppliers are receiving is much higher because that is given by P star. As a result of which both the producer and buyer, they are maintaining a surplus with them. So this is what we learned. Now so far we understood demand, we understood supply, demand curve, supply curve, equilibrium, price, quantity, and consumer and producer surplus. Now the question is, if any of these factors that determine demand and supply, they change, what would be the new price and quantity? Okay, what would be the new price and quantity? So that means we will now discuss movement. We will now discuss movement along the demand curve. So, movement along the demand curve. So, let us say this is your quantity, this is your price, this is the demand curve. Okay. So, as price increases, let us say initially price and quantity is this Q1, this is P1. So, when price increases from P1 to P2, what will happen? When price increases from P1 to P2, quantity demand actually falls from Q1 to Q2. So, that means we are moving along the demand curve. Similarly, when price falls from P1 to P3, quantity demand actually increases from Q1 to Q3, and that is how you see when there is a change in price, then we are getting a movement along the demand curve either upward or downward. So, a change in price, makes a movement along the demand curve. That is what I am saying. Okay. So, when I am writing demand function QD, so this is movement along the demand curve. Happens when price changes. So, quantity demand, as we said, is a function of price of X, income, price of related product, taste and preference. So, when price of X, Px is changing, we are getting a movement along the demand curve. Okay. Along the demand curve movement we will get only when there is a change in price. Now, what will happen when other factors, that means parameters, they change? Either income of the consumer is changing, price of related product is changing, or taste and preference is changing. What will happen? Suppose this is your initial, this is Q, this is P, this is your initial demand. Let us say this is AB. Okay. AB, when I equals to I0, let us say AB is the demand curve when I equals to I0. Now, let us assume the consumer is getting an income I equals to I1 and I1 is greater than I0. The income of the consumer has changed. That means income of the consumer has increased. So, obviously, it is easy to understand for each level of price, for each price, now the consumer will demand more. Okay. Whatever be the price, for each level there would be an increased demand, and as a result of which the entire demand curve will shift rightward. So, entire demand curve will shift rightward. When there is a increase in income. Similarly, if there is a fall in income, this is, let us say, AB equals to I equals to I0, and then you have another income I equals to I2, and let us assume that I2 is actually I2 is less than I1. I2 is less than I0, what you initially have. So, what will happen? For each price, consumer would be able to buy less amount. So, demand curve will shift rightward. Let us say this is A, B, C, D, and let us say this is E, F. So, this causes demand curve to shift rightward. That means when it is shifting rightward means consumers are buying more, and this will make, when the income is falling from initial level, then demand curve shifts leftward. Okay, this is corresponding demand curve, this is corresponding demand curve. So, income, which was considered as a parameter, was assumed to be fixed or given when we are talking about initially the demand and supply. Now, if we allow income to change, particularly when the income of the individual is increasing or decreasing, a change in income causing the entire demand schedule to shift either rightward or downward depending on the direction at which income is changing, depending on whether income is increasing or decreasing. A rise in income will cause the demand curve to shift rightward, because at each price consumer will now demand more. A fall in income will cause demand to fall leftward, because at each price consumers are buying less. This is what is happening here. Okay, right? So, that means one thing we have learned here: movement along the demand curve and shift in demand schedule. These are the two things. So, shift will happen when the parameters they change. Movement along the demand curve will happen when there is a change in price. Okay, when there is a change in price. Same thing will happen when price of related product changes. That was also considered as a parameter. Suppose we are considering this is demand for wheat. If the price of rice increases, what will happen? Let us say that this is demand for wheat. Okay, we will go to next page. So, what will happen? What happens to demand curve for rice when price of wheat, or sorry, this is demand curve for wheat we are considering earlier, and let's say price of rice changes. Let's say this is Q, this is P, and this is the demand for wheat we are talking about. So now, if case 1, price of wheat has increased, what will happen? Sorry, this is price of rice has increased. This is demand for wheat we are considering. So if we assume, let's say wheat and rice, these are the two substitute product. So we assume wheat and rice are substitute to each other. Let us make this assumption. So when there is a rise in price of rice has increased. So what will happen? If they are substitute to each other, consumer will demand more of wheat for each level of prices. As a result of which, demand for wheat will increase. So that means the entire demand schedule for wheat will shift rightward. This is what will happen. Okay. So when the price of the substitute product increases, that result in more demand for the commodity we are considering. Here we assume rice is a substitute for wheat. So when rice price has increased, that will result in demand for wheat. Demand for wheat increases, as a result of which demand curve shifts rightward. Similarly, when Py decreases, that means rice price has decreased. So obviously consumer will switch their demand from wheat to rice. Okay. So that means demand for wheat falls, and as a result of which demand curve for wheat shifts leftward, because at each price of wheat now the consumers are buying less. So there would be a leftward shift in the demand curve. So that means what will happen to the demand for wheat when the price of related product increases or decreases? That depends on what is the nature or relationship between the two commodity. Here rice and wheat we assume to be substitute to each other. Okay, that is why when there is a rise in price of rice, consumer will switch their demand from rice to wheat. Demand curve of wheat shifts entirely rightward. When there is a fall in price of rice, consumers will shift their demand from wheat to rice. Demand for wheat falls, the demand curve for wheat shifts leftward. So this is the case when we assume two goods are substitute to each other. Now let us assume a case when goods are complementary. To each other. Can you give some example of this? Complementary good. Complementary goods are those we have to consume them jointly. Individual consumption does not give much satisfaction. Think about tea and sugar. Tea and sugar. They are complementary to each other. And now assume the demand curve Q and P. This is the demand curve, demand for tea, demand curve for tea. So what happens when the sugar price increases? Case 1, sugar price has increased. When sugar price has increased, obviously I have to consume less tea because I cannot get tea without sugar. So when price of complementary product increases, that will result in less demand for the good we are talking about. So when sugar price increased, demand for tea falls, as a result of which this demand curve shifts leftward, because at each price consumer will now buy less tea. Please keep in mind, even though my drawing is not proper, this is a parallel shift actually. This is a parallel shift because for each price of tea, consumer will buy less tea. So this is a parallel shift. So when sugar price has increased, that will result in reduction in tea demand, and demand curve shifts leftward. Similarly, when sugar price decreased, what will happen? Consumer will buy more tea. Consumer will consume more tea. So demand curve will shift rightward. So that will lead to increase in tea consumption. And that will lead to demand curve to shift rightward. Okay. So this is the movement rightward. Okay. So one thing we learned here, when there is a change in the parameter, the entire demand schedule will shift either rightward or leftward. But movement of the demand curve, whether it is left or right, that depends on the nature of the two goods, relationship of the two goods. If the goods are substitute, then we will get one type of movement or shift. If the goods are complementary, then we will get another type of movement or shift. But whatever happens, in these cases, entire demand schedule is shifting. Earlier, we were getting only a movement along the demand curve. Okay, a movement along the demand curve. So, movement along the demand curve vis-a-vis shift in entire demand schedule that we have learned. A change in price will result in a movement along the demand curve, while a change in the parameters like price of related product, income, taste and preference, all these things will result in a shift in the entire demand schedule. That is what we have learned. Same thing will happen for the supply function as well. So, for the supply function, that means movement along the supply curve and shift in supply curve. Again, let us say this is Q, this is P, this is the initial supply curve, SS1. Okay, and what we have assumed that supply for a commodity X is a function of, first of all, P of X, then P of Y, then technology, input prices. Let us say this is price of input, weather, so on and so forth. Now let us assume that price of input has changed. Okay, if we consider ice cream, let us say that one of the input is sugar. So sugar price has increased. What will happen? Cost of production will increase. So for each price, now seller has less incentive to supply, because ice cream production becomes less profitable because there is an increase in sugar price. So what will happen? Supplier will supply less. So this is again a parallel shift, please keep in mind. Okay, this is case 1 we are talking about. What is the case 1? That this is supply of our ice cream we are talking about. When sugar price increases, what will happen? Cost of production increases, as a result of which supply curve shift upward, because there would be less supply. Upward shift means less supply. So when there is a change in input price, entire supply schedule is shifting upward, indicating a fact that there will be less supply in ice cream. Similarly, if there is a fall in sugar price, maybe in a particular year there is a huge production of sugar cane, what will happen? Sugar price will fall. Since sugar is one of the important inputs in ice cream production, supplier will then. So, this is a case where Pi is increasing. So, Pi increasing. So, now we can assume a case 2, where Pi, that means price of sugar, is falling. That will lead to more supply. More supply of ice cream. Supply curve will shift downward. That means more supply. Supply curve shifts downward. Okay. So, again shift in the entire supply curve. Now, if we bring demand and supply together in a single diagram, we can easily understand what will happen to equilibrium, price and quantity when any of these factors affecting either demand or supply or both is changing. Suppose we want to analyze. We are discussing about demand and supply of ice cream, and let's say there is a increase in consumers' income. What will happen to the equilibrium price and quantity of ice cream? So, what happens to ice cream demand or supply, ice cream price and its demand or supply when income changes. Let us assume this is the initial demand curve for ice cream and this is initial supply of ice cream. This is the equilibrium price and quantity. Now, as income increases, what we have learned earlier, that the entire demand curve will shift rightward. So, if the entire demand curve shifts rightward, what will happen? This is increasing, this is also increasing. So, that means a change in consumers' income results in both equilibrium price and quantity to increase. Similarly, a fall in consumers' income will result in shift the demand curve leftward. So, this is the movement when there is an increase in demand. Okay, an increase in demand will result in more quantity demanded and supply and price also to increase. Right? This is how we can analyze what will happen. Similarly, if we think about, let's say, what happens to demand, to price, let's say P and Q, I will write P and Q when price of sugar increases. So, we are considering demand and supply of ice cream. Let us say initially this is the demand for ice cream and this is the supply of ice cream. This is initial price and quantity equilibrium. What will happen when there is a increase in sugar price? So, price of sugar has increased means what we have learned earlier, that cost of production will go up. When cost of production increases, what will happen to the supply curve? Will it shift rightward or leftward or downward or upward? That we have to remember. Obviously, when sugar price increases, cost of production for ice cream will increase. So, ice cream production becomes less profitable now. So, ice cream supplier will supply less of ice cream. So, supply curve will shift upward. That means what is happening here? At equilibrium then, quantity, demand and supply falls and price increases. Obviously, when there is less supply, then what will happen? The price will increase in the market. Okay, initial equilibrium was P star and Q star. Now, as a result of cost of production has increased due to change in price of sugar, we see that equilibrium price and quantity has increased. So, as a result of sugar, what is happening? Both price and quantity have increased. Okay. So, that means using simple demand and supply tool, we can easily understand what will happen to the new price and quantity when certain things changes which were assumed to be constant earlier. Okay, which were assumed to be constant earlier. A change in price, let's say government is now imposing a tax on ice cream consumption. What will happen? This is P and this is Q, this is the demand. This is initially you are here. So, when there is a change in price due to a tax imposition, you will get a movement along the demand curve. Price will increase and quantity demand will fall. That is a movement along the demand curve. But when other things are changing, that will lead to a shift in the entire demand and supply schedule. Okay. So, this is how it happens. So far we have discussed only either the change in demand or either the shift in demand or shift in supply. But it may so happen both the things are happening together. Consumers' income is increasing and let's say cost of production is also increasing. That will result in then an increase in demand due to increase in income and at the same time fall in supply due to increase in cost of production. Right? So, we will discuss those cases in our next class. When demand curve and supply curve shifts together, what will happen to the new equilibrium price and quantity? That we will discuss in our next class. Thank you.